I came to know Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior in 1987. I was raised Lutheran, but didn't have a born-again experience, didn't know I needed one, wasn't even sure God existed, but the Lord made himself crystal clear to me, and I realized that it was either surrender my life to him or probably end up, dead in a ditch somewhere. Really, I was kind of going the other direction pretty hard. And then in 1990, I married my best friend, who's right there, and still my best friend after 34 years. So that is awesome. The Lord has given us 5 sons, and we have 2 daughter-in-laws and 3 grandchildren so far, and the other 3 boys are all in pretty serious relationships, so we might have 5 daughter-in-laws in the next year or two. And Carrie always wanted a girl, and now she's getting them through marriage instead of through birth. So starting in the 90s, I felt like the Lord wanted me to plant a church. And so I started preparing for church planting back, late 90s. Moved to Menasha. We were on staff at a church in Des Moines, Iowa. Moved to Menasha, started attending Christ the Rock Church, and then got through their leadership, their leadership, what do you call that, Jim? Their yeah, something. They have these courses and the paces they want you to go through in leadership. Then we went to a church planters assessment with Christ the Rock, and we were thinking that we'd plant a church someday. And but in 2012, the Lord kind of derailed our train and said, this was in prayer one morning, and the Lord said to me, I told you to go make disciples, and I also said, I will build my church. Let's keep that clear. Felt like it was kind of a loving rebuke, after 17 years of preparing for church planting, and the Lord says, no, you make disciples, I'll make church. You do your job, I'll do my job. And it took me a little while to kind of reconcile myself to that. After 17 years, I'm thinking, seriously, Lord? But after a couple weeks, I said, okay, Lord, if you just want me to make disciples, like it was a demotion, like I was going to be, grand pastor of grand congregation or something. And I said, if you just want me to make disciples, then show me how and where and with whom, and I'll do it. And you can ask Carrie, after that prayer, everything in our life changed. We got connected with people doing this thing called disciple-making movements. We'd never heard about that, didn't know what that was. We're hearing about entire Muslim villages coming to Christ. We're hearing about miracles happening. It's entire Muslim mosques coming to Christ. Followers of Christ multiplying like you'd never believe possible. So one thing led to another, and we began in 2016, so between those 2 years, we were experimenting with this and learning what is this disciple-making movements thing, and it was like all the pieces of the puzzle that were missing from those 17 years of preparing for church planting, all the pieces got filled in, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, now it makes sense. And then we miraculously started receiving invitations to go overseas and do this training. And, Thailand and Saudi Peninsula and Pakistan and just all over the place. And the disciples started to multiply. And so we felt like, okay, this is serious. This is something God's doing. So we'll form a ministry. So we formed a 501c3 nonprofit ministry, which originally was called the International Disciple Making Initiative, the IDMI. Nobody could remember the name or the letters. They couldn't find the website. And so the Lord brought us some marketing people who used to work in the corporate marketing world, and now they work in the kingdom. And they volunteered to help us make a new name and a new, so that logo you saw and the name Go Multiply, so much easier to remember. And all over the world, you can imagine trying to translate the International Disciple Making Initiative into Swahili, right? They're like, thank you so much for just doing Go Multiply. So that was in 2016, and since that time, it has been nothing short of miraculous. And it's not because we're special, but it's because we're showing people how Jesus trained his disciples to disciple nations. He told them that. He said, if you follow me, I'll make you into a fisher of men. And in another place, he said, if you follow me, I'll show you how to fish for people. So he sets the example. And then as they followed him for those 3 years, he transformed them from fishers of fish or tax collectors or zealots into disciplers of nations. And so as we show this to people and they go out and put it into practice, it is, they multiply like crazy. And I'll tell you some stories, and you'll find them hard to believe. I got to be honest with you, because you'll think, could that happen in America? But it's the same God. It could happen here. And that's why we're doing this training here. So this training is free. But at the end of the training, we're going to ask you to consider a gift to our ministry, but we don't ever want to charge people on the front end because it might not be worth anything to you. So when it's all over, we're going to give you an opportunity to make a gift to the ministry if you feel like this has value. If you feel like it has no value, then donate zero, because we want you to donate whatever it's worth to you. And we also want to ask you for 5 references of people who might benefit from this training, people in your life that you know that we don't know. So I just wanted to put that out there up front so it's not like a bait and switch. Like tomorrow when I say, hey, and by the way, if you'd like to give, then you'd be like, hey, you didn't say you were asking for money. This is not about fundraising. This is about multiplying disciples of Jesus Christ. But we find that our biggest supporters and our most long-term supporters are people who've gone through this training and seen the benefit in their own lives and ministries. Okay? All right. If you want to leave now, you can, because if you're afraid, I don't want anybody asking me for money. Just kidding. So what we're calling this training now is we're calling it the Endgame of God, because it appears to us that Jesus is in the process of finishing the Great Commission by multiplying obedient followers of himself. And so, and we'll talk more about this, but mathematically, the only way to finish the Great Commission, the only way to multiply followers faster than the population is growing, is through something like this disciple-making movements. There's not enough time to build a building for every single person who comes to Christ and then, have them come sit there on Sunday mornings. And that's not the system that we saw or that we will see in the New Testament. So we call it the Endgame of God, and what seems to be happening is that God's restoring the New Testament church, the system that Jesus brought. He's restoring that all over the world so that he can finish the Great Commission. So we want you to join him. And I think that's why you're here, right? You want to join him. You want to learn this and go, oh, should I be doing that? So our website is called gomultiply.org. And if you go there and you click on resources, you will find the book called The Endgame of God. It's there in a PDF download, and it is, it's not free. It's available for a donation of any amount. The minimum you can pay is $1. That's just as low as the computer slider would go. We want to get the information out there, but to an American audience, if you don't pay something, then you tend to view it as not having value. So that's why we ask for at least, a donation of $1. So you can get that book. And also, we've been struggling to get that book on Amazon. So if any of you know anybody who could take a Word document and get it to the point where Amazon will publish it, because they have strict parameters, talk to me afterwards, because it's been a Herculean struggle for about a year, and we still don't have it up. So, yeah, I told someone it's a miraculously difficult, and he was like, that doesn't make sense to me. But maybe God is saying, don't do it, or don't do it yet, or don't do it with Amazon, or I don't know. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about me. Some of you I've known for years. Some of you I'm just meeting tonight. I spend a lot of time overseas doing trainings, training mostly pastors and missionaries. And then after the training, because they already have like a network, a leadership team, and when they start to put this stuff into practice, they see tremendous results. Last fall, I was in 6 countries. I was gone for 11 weeks, trained about 2,000 people. They had started more than 3,000 churches before I even got back to the United States. I mean, it's amazing. And you will be able to do that too. So Carrie came with me and her best friend to Ethiopia. We started in Ethiopia, then we went to Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Nepal, and India. The night before the first training started, I had a dream. And in the dream, the Lord said, "You need to draw them a picture." And then he gave me the picture that I need to draw them. And so I started that first training with that picture, and it made all the difference. Before I started drawing this picture, there would always be questions and there'd be confusion and sometimes there'd be like pushback. But now that I draw this picture first to start the training, there's never any objections, there's no pushback, there's not even very many questions. And so I did this picture, I drew it for every single one of 17 trainings that I did back to back through all those countries. And that is probably partly why they had such tremendous results. So I'm going to show you that dream. I'm going to show you that picture right now and explain, because like I said, this just really helps us to understand, like, what is this that we're actually talking about? So the Endgame of God dream. Now I'm going to show you a timeline, and this timeline represents the history of the church from before Christ came until he comes next time, right? So we're in between his first and second coming right now. So this little line here represents Jesus' arrival. When he came onto the earth, and when he came to the earth, there was a religious environment that he entered into, the Jewish religious environment. And the Jews at that time had 2 kind of religious systems. They had the temple worship system, but they also had the synagogue system. You see Jesus going to the synagogues, numerous times. And so that was the environment that he came into. And I want to look at a Bible verse to kind of help us understand what was going on there. Would somebody be willing to read Mark 2:18 through 22? And please stand up when you read, just so it's a little easier to hear you. The awkward silence. Thank you, Jim. Oh, yeah.
Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples don't?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they can't fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins."
Amen. Thank you very much. Tristan, did you get that okay? Perfect. So Jesus is being challenged because he doesn't operate according to the traditions of the religious people of his day. They're saying, hey, the disciples of John the Baptist fast and the disciples of the Pharisees fast. Why do your disciples not fast? And so he tells them, well, I'm the bridegroom. I'm here with them. They can't fast while I'm here, but when I'm gone, then they will fast. And then he starts comparing new and old things. He's still answering that question. And he says, and also, you wouldn't take new cloth and sew it onto old cloth. You just make the tear worse. You don't mix the new thing and the old thing. That's the point that he's making. And then he transitions into wine. And he says, you don't put new wine in an old wineskin, because if you do, what will happen?
Burst.
Yeah, it'll burst. Does anybody know why it will burst? Anybody know why the old wineskin bursts from the new wine?
Dry.
Well, the old wineskin's dry, right? So let me give you an example. My covering of my body is made out of skin. Yeah? And this skin that I'm wearing, it can stretch. Ask Carrie, after the holidays last year, it had stretched a little bit. But I'm also wearing a belt made out of animal skin, but the belt can't stretch because it's old animal skin, right? Yeah, exactly. So when you take grape juice, Carrie, I see you have a water bottle there. Would you hold that up for everyone to see? If I were to fill that bottle with grape juice, I'd have a bottle of grape juice. If I were to fill that bottle with grape juice and put yeast in there, I'd have a bomb. Because it can't expand. It'll crack a little bit and then it'll explode. So a fresh animal skin can stretch. When I'm doing this in other countries, I ask them, how many of you have ever handled a sheepskin? And like everybody, or a goat skin, like every hand in the room goes up. Oh yeah, once a week. They know that a fresh animal skin is flexible, it's stretchy. So when you're making wine, you have to have it in a sealed container that can expand. So they would take their grape juice and they would sew an animal skin closed tightly. They'd put the grape juice in there, they'd add some yeast, and they'd seal it. And then while the sugars are being converted into alcohol by the activity of the activity of the bacteria and the yeast, that it causes that expansion. But you can only stretch an animal skin once. So you use it once, and then after that, it's just a container, like her water bottle. It can hold water, it can hold wine, but it can't hold new wine that's being converted because the new wine has too much expansion. When Jesus gave this teaching, there were 200 synagogues in the city of Jerusalem alone, not to mention all the other cities of Israel. And so I think what Jesus was saying to them is, I'm bringing something new. I'm not going to try to blend it with your old thing because it won't fit. It's going to have rapid, powerful expansion. And if I try to take my new thing and I put it in your old religious system, I'm going to ruin them both. I was given this training in northern Uganda once, and we were in a little mud-walled church building. It was literally probably like if we took just these two sets of tables, maybe to here, and made it like an oval, and there were 70 people in there, and they were all sitting on the floor or on little plastic chairs. They were packed like sardines. There was no room for any more people. In fact, the building was probably made to hold about 50. And I asked them, what would happen if each one of you went out tonight and brought one person with you tomorrow? And they said, we'd break we wouldn't fit. Our system would be broken, right? We'd have to find somewhere else to meet. We'd have to do something else. Exactly. That's what Jesus was talking about here. When we're going to be doing some practice Bible studies tomorrow mostly. And when we do those practice Bible studies, we need people to have room to spread out. And in this little mud-walled, grass-roofed church building, there was no room for that. So I said, I'm going to have you guys break into groups of 4 and go outside. We were in a big grassy field that was dotted with mango trees. And mango trees they have very thick foliage, so the shade under a mango tree is very nice shade. So I said, just go outside and find some shade and meet under a tree. And so everybody got up. They all went outside. Building's empty. And then I had to duck, to get outside, and I walk out because I'm going to videotape them doing their Bible studies under trees. And as I'm ducking out, going outside, I felt like the Holy Spirit said, see, this is what it looks like when you put new wine in a new wineskin. New wineskin has room for expansion. There was probably room for 500 more people in the shade of all those mango trees, but there wasn't room for one more person in that little building, right? So we, as I mentioned, right, I was in Africa last fall, and in Kenya, we did a training, and the day before the training, I went to a pastor's breakfast. I invited the pastors to come to the training the next day, and a few of them did. One of them sent his senior female leader, the one who's, the most active in the church. Everybody knows her, loves her. She's running the women's ministry and all of that. And she comes to the training, very active participant in the training. And the pastor had said, learn whatever that man's teaching and come back and, share it with us, teach it to us. She comes back, tells him what she learned, and he literally said these words. He said, you can't do that here because you will break my church. Yeah, and he was right. Yeah, and actually that's what ended up happening. So she kept telling everybody in the church about what she had learned, and the pastor told her, you got to stop talking about that. It's, because it's causing problems for me. And she would not stop talking about it because she felt like Jesus commanded us to make disciples of all nations. And so the pastor kicked her out of the church. So she went down the street, rented a house, and invited people to come there, and she'd teach them what she learned. That was in October. The church that she was kicked out of had been around for decades, had about 400 or 500 people at the time. Today, that church has about 160 people. Not that that's something to celebrate, but her network of disciples has 5,000 people. 550 churches have been started by not just her, but the people she trained, and then the people they train, and the people they train. And this will become very clear to you. It's not rocket science. In fact, Jesus is a genius. He knows that if he institutes a simple, powerful system, it will work so much better than if he institutes a complicated religious system like what he was born into, right? The Jewish system, very complicated. I think I just heard the other day, out of the 600 laws they have to obey, 200 of them need a temple. They can only obey 400 of them today because they don't have a temple right now. So just all of this, very complicated system. So the synagogue system of Jesus' day, that's the system that was in place because the temple worship was only 7 times a year. They'd go to the temple for the feasts and those kind of things. But it's 7 times a year. The rest of the time, they were meeting in synagogues. And the synagogue was a building. It was a building where they would meet for a few hours a week on Saturday mornings. We meet on Sunday mornings. They met on Saturday mornings. They had a person in charge. The man in charge was called the synagogue ruler. And they had weekly meetings that consisted of... Now, when I list these, just ask yourself if this sounds familiar to you. Their weekly meetings consisted of announcements. Someone would read some scriptures. Someone would pray. They would sing some songs. Someone would give a spiritual message. And then they would have a closing prayer and a benediction, and they'd all go home. Does that sound like anything any of you have ever experienced? Yeah, it's the same system that most of us probably grew up in. I grew up in a system like that. But is it the system that Jesus came to bring? So that line there represents the timing of the New Testament church. And the New Testament church, the system that Jesus brought, lasted for about 300 years. Jesus began his ministry when he was about 30. When he was about 33, he ascended to heaven. In that 3-year period, he established something. He established a system. Oftentimes, we call it the new wine system. So we call the synagogue system the old wineskin system based on what Jesus was teaching, right? That, hey, you can't take the new thing and put it in the old thing. You'll ruin them both. Don't try to mix them, right? So we refer to the system that Jesus brought as the new wineskin system because it has the capacity for rapid expansion. Now, that line there represents the return of Christ. And what comes after the return of Christ? Anybody know?
Tribulation and the millennium,
Okay, so the millennium's what I'm looking for. So how long does that last?
1,000 years.
Right, and that's the kingdom age. Jesus is going to come back in the not too distant future, and he's going to establish his kingdom on earth, and he's going to rule and reign from this earth for 1,000 years. So that's 1,000 years. That means that we're somewhere close to the return of Christ. How many of you think we're living in the last days?
Come on.
Anybody think we're not living in the last days? Yeah, no hands.
Maybe a few minutes.
What's that?
Maybe a few minutes.
Yeah. So I don't know where we're at in the last days. I don't claim to predict when Jesus is going to come back, but boy, you just have to watch the news, and I personally watch news from our international news. Like, I don't necessarily just want to hear it from the American talking heads. I want to hear what Al Jazeera has to say, and I want to hear what they have to say in Sky News Australia, and because the people here might be telling you what they want you to believe or whatever. So you all agree we're living in the last days. So that little time slot there, that's the last days. We're somewhere in there. I don't know how close we are to the end. And some people come and say, well, when's the rapture happening there? And I'm like, that's not what we're here to discuss. But we are, so this line here, I wish this would show up on a screen. I have a little dot, a little laser pointer, right? But the line after 300 years says AD 324. Does anybody know what happened to the church world in AD 324?
Nicene Creed Christianity became legalized.
Christianity became legal, and largely due to the influence of a man named Constantine, Emperor Constantine. Now, prior to that, the Christians had been in persecution, they had been in hiding, meeting in small groups in homes or businesses or caves or wherever under a tree, but trying not to be noticed because it was illegal. When the book of Romans was written, for example, the emperor of Rome was a man named Nero. And Nero used to collect the Christians, and he would put them on a pole, and he would wrap them in fabric soaked in tar, and he would light them on fire. And that was the way he lit the city of Rome. They were like streetlights. And it's not that the Romans had multiple gods, just like all the Greek gods. They had all these different gods. They would have happily accepted Jesus as one of their 100 or 1,000 gods. But the problem was Jesus is exclusive. These people were like, no, I won't worship the emperor, and I won't worship any of those other gods. I worship Jesus alone. And that's what got them killed. So then Constantine becomes emperor, and most people that I've spoken to or read about this, they don't believe he ever actually got saved, but that he was operating in a, if you can't beat them, join them kind of a way. So he legalized Christianity and allowed people to come out from hiding, but because they'd been in hiding, he didn't have any source material to build his religion on. At the time, Constantine was the most powerful man in the world. And if you're the most powerful man in the world and you're going to start a religion, you're not going to do just kind of a halfway job, are you? Right? Like when Donald Trump was president, I used to ask it this way. I'd say, if Donald Trump was inventing a religion, would he just kind of do it, halfway? Or would it be over the top? Have you ever seen Trump Tower or the Trump Hotel? I mean, over the top. So Constantine is inventing a religion, and he's going to make the best religion the world has ever seen. But the problem is he doesn't have any source material because the true followers of Christ have been hiding. They've been in caves, and they've been, meeting in homes in small groups. They're not out in the open. So you know what he did? He looked around at the pagan religions of Rome, and he copied it, and he relabeled it. So he said, well, they have temples, so we'll have temples.